What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, we're chatting with Devon Givens from Locked On 76ers. The Sixers are without Joel Embiid for the first part of their second round matchup against the Miami Heat. Can James Harden and company elevate their play without their star big man and potentially steal a game in South Beach? But first, a quick message from our friends over at Built Bar, because when it comes to protein bars, you got to check out Built Bar. They're the number one protein bar on the market. They've got so many incredible flavors to choose from. Every single bar is coated in 100% delicious chocolate. They're not gritty or chalky like other protein bars on the market. And again, the flavors, right? You got raspberry, strawberry, mint brownie, salted caramel, cookies and cream. My personal favorite, coconut brownie chunk. You can't go wrong with a single flavor on their menu. Every single bar is low cal, low sugar, high protein, high fiber. Amazing if you're on a keto diet. Amazing if you're trying to cut back a little bit, lose a little bit of weight. You could check them out. Just go to built.com and use promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your very next order of the best tasting protein bars on the market. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. Joining us now is Devon Givens from Locked On Sixers. You can follow on Twitter at DevonG975. Now, Devon, look, no Joel Embiid for at least the first two games of this semifinal series between the Sixers and the Miami Heat. There's maybe some optimism that Embiid could be back, as early as games 3 or maybe game 4 in this series. But up until that point, right, the Sixers are finding themselves without their star big man. So first things first, what do you expect the starting lineup to be here in game 1? And just how drastically does the Sixers rotation change with no Joel Embiid in the mix?
Well, Doc Rivers spoke about them going center by committee. And we're talking about Paul Reed, who got the primary minutes backing up Joel Embiid in the Raptors series. And then you have to include DeAndre Jordan, Paul Millsap, and as of late, rookie Charles Bassey. Bassey has been out with an injury, but he did practice in full on Saturday with the team and also Sunday as well. So curious to see how it goes. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure because he has kept it under wraps. And now maybe that's just, of course, keeping it from Eric Spoelstra and the coaching staff, not giving them any type of edge and the advantage going into the game planning because they're going to have to game plan for all four of them. That being said, I'd imagine right now, just as a guess, maybe Paul Reed, just because he did get those primary minutes. But do you go with the veteran in Jordan or Millsap? If we go back to the final regular season game that these two teams had without Embiid and Harden in the lineup, Paul Millsap did start. DeAndre Jordan had some minutes there as well. But it was really Tyrese Maxey that had a really solid game. Shake Milton, Furkan Korkmaz mixing in some really good performances there as well. So I would say the normal starting four. I think Danny Green stays in the starting lineup. No Matisse Thybulle since he's eligible now for all possible 7 games. I'd imagine they stick with those starting 4. But the fifth, it's up in the air right now because they're being pretty quiet about who they're going to lean towards. Right now, I guess Paul Reed.
I'm glad you mentioned that last regular season matchup between these two teams, and we're going to get to that in just a second here. But I want to go, not only are they trying to replace just the 48 minutes? Well, not a full 48, obviously, from Joel Embiid, but they're not just trying to replace his minutes. They're trying to replace his production, which is easier said than done when you're trying to replace an MVP caliber level player's production on the court on both ends. So in your eyes, is this something where they're going to be replacing Embiid's production by committee, or is it just going to be, more shots distributed for the remaining, big 3 for the Sixers between Harden, Maxey, and Tobias Harris, or is it just going to be kind of whoever can step up to the plate is going to get those shots?
I think in the beginning, they'll lean more towards the big 3, if you will, that are left over, and not the big 3 in the sense as we know what a big 3 is, but the 3 that are left with Harden, Maxey, and Harris, to lean on them pretty heavily with their offensive production. And then, of course, scheme the other things in. Having the bench come in and be a little more productive, look to their scoring as well, George Niang, Shake Milton, and see how far Doc Rivers decides to go deeper into his bench with that. Danny Green had a nice series as well, but the head coach talked about leaning towards Harden a lot and maybe funneling things more towards him where the offense will be driven through James Harden. Maybe not as much as we've seen in the past because the Houston James Harden doesn't seem like that exists. And that's okay because this is why you have a top head coach of all time now and Doc Rivers with his staff. There's some really good names there to figure this out. And if there was any indication of what James Harden can bring you, you have to go back to game number 6. And stepping up in the moment, 10 points, 5 assists right away, 22 points at the end of the game, 15 assists on the evening to help in the closeout situation, and where they've been asking for him, Jackson, to be a lot more aggressive in looking for his, not just being a distributor, but also looking for his. And that's what he did. I mentioned the 10-5. That was the first quarter. So he came out, he set the tone right away and giving us a glimpse of what he was going to be like that night. Now, as he did that, Joel Embiid stepped up his scoring performance. Danny Green hit 4 threes in one quarter. And then in the third, Tyrese Maxey scored 15. So he set the tone. The others did their parts of compartmentalizing how they were doing it. And next thing you know, James Harden ends up with 22 because you only needed 12 more points from him. So his assisting and his distributing was there, but the setting the tone of being an aggressor and letting the Raptors know that he was going to be a scorer that night as well, maybe made them change up their defensive philosophy just a bit. So I'd imagine that Eric Spoelstra and the Miami Heat look back at that final game that we just mentioned briefly, and of course what Harden did, knowing that he's going to be the next man up to be that guy, that first option that they try to slow down. So that's where I think they start, and then they'll make their adjustment, as all coaches do, as the game starts to progress and see how they're being defended.
Yeah, James Harden, obviously not quite the same James Harden from his MVP caliber seasons here in Houston. However, still very capable of taking over a game when necessary. And realistically, you're looking at the series from a Sixers perspective. And if they can maybe steal one of these first two games in Miami, and it completely changes the outlook of the entire series. But you go back to his numbers in the first round, 6 games across the first round, didn't break 20 points per game average, just averaged 19 points, but did have double-digit assist numbers. And as you alluded to, did step up big time in game 6 when they needed that closeout performance, that closeout win. Now, when you look at these two teams, Devon, you mentioned it before, but that final regular season game between these two franchises, and there was no James Harden or Joel Embiid in that game. So from the Sixers lens, what lessons can they try to take and hopefully maybe emulate from that game? A game in which Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, Kyle Lowry, they all went for 20 plus in that game. So it wasn't like the Miami Heat were hurt or underperforming. The Sixers were still able to come away with the win in that one.
Yeah, you saw some fast pace that they want to do. They want to play with some pace in the game, and Tyrese Maxey is the perfect person for that with his speed and his ability to get out there and in transition. Number one, even in the half court, you could see him really, Jackson. He turns it up. If you haven't seen much of him, Miami Heat fans, you'll get ready to. And look, they may just stop him defensively, but you'll see what I'm talking about with his speed and how it's a difference maker in this game. And defensively, you have Kyle Lowry, who's going to be out for game 1 already, but he's there defensively. He's really solid. You know that Jimmy Butler, now he may not be able to stick with him and keep up with his speed. Defensively, though, he knows how to use his angles and his body to put that strength on Tyrese Maxey to possibly slow him down. But that's one thing that they use there as well, the penetration, getting there and pulling Bam Adebayo away from the basket as a shot blocker. So use that in the half-court set. Use those angles to get to the rim, get to the basket, the painted area, and get those shots off. So that was something that we saw in that game there as well. Despite the fact of 20 each from those 3 performers that you spoke about, Tyrese Maxey was really on full display. Also, Shake Milton, Furkan Korkmaz, just getting the production from the guards the way that they needed to in that way. So that is a bit of a formula, again, with no Embiid and having to go with these other 4 centers. There's a way that you can still compete. The other one, as I point out the offensive part, oftentimes you find teams that identify a weak spot defensively. We've seen it in Philadelphia where they'll target somebody here, and you've seen it, George Niang as an example, the Raptors tried to get him. They got him a few times, but they tried to get him. And that final game against the Miami Heat, Tyler Hero was a turnstile, and they were finding him every chance they could down the floor, identifying that matchup and attacking it. And I think that the amount of minutes that he plays and him being in there, they're going to do their best to find him. Even if he's hiding on another player, they're going to come up, set those screens, get him to switch off and attack Tyler Hero. And if you get him in foul trouble, if you get him off of his game, maybe that will also affect his offensive production on the other end, where his confidence may wane a little bit based on what is being done to him on the other end of the floor.
Yeah, no Kyle Lowry for game one for the Miami Heat. A ton of the Miami Heat players listed as questionable or probable for the game. I would imagine that the rest of the lineup probably stays intact, especially it being a playoff game, but at least no Kyle Lowry. So that maybe levels things out a little bit in the Sixers' favor. Obviously, you can't put Kyle Lowry and Joel Embiid on the same tier, but at least it helps the Sixers out a little bit more. Yeah, Kyle Lowry, very important part of what the Miami Heat are trying to accomplish here. But I need you to maybe get out of my notes here, Devon, because my very next question was going to be about mismatches that the Sixers could, potentially expose. And you were so gracious as to highlight Tyler Herro there. And so that should be, something that Sixers fans pay attention to, and Miami Heat fans as well, is seeing, how detrimental Tyler Herro's defense might be in this series if the 76ers look to pick on him on that end of the basketball floor. So with that, Devon, I got to ask you before we get you out of here, give me your series prediction for how this thing turns out.
Wow. Honestly, wow. With the unknown right now of Joel Embiid, that's tough. Man, I would say Miami in 6 just because of Joel Embiid and how important he is with this. But they do have some prideful guys here in Philadelphia, and they know it's at stake. They've done this before. They played without him out on the floor for an extended period of time. They're going to compete. But if I had to choose right now, just not knowing and unclear of obviously if they can split in Miami, that I would give Miami in 6 right now. With Jackson, you got to give me the opportunity to potentially change things if he is, in fact, able to go at some point in this series. I might have to adjust it a little bit.
It's okay. We're going to give you that chance to adjust it depending on how this series plays out. Obviously, you'll have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Sixers. Devon, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Nah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.